So, to everyone, I'd like to say welcome to today's segment on career discussion with senior Black leadership. My name is Joyce Lawson. I am a visible minority representative for the Canada Revenue Agency Western Region Employment Equity, Diversity and Inclusive Subcommittee. Today, I'm here presenting with my co-moderator, Liz Martin. But before we turn over to Liz to introduce herself, let me say, we are grateful to be working, meeting, and living our lives on the traditional territories of Canada's First Nation, Métis, Inuit, and Inuit people. We acknowledge that much of this land is unceded. Now, if you will hear from Liz.
Very much. I apologize. Bonjour et bienvenue à la séance d'aujourd'hui. Nous discuterons des carrières avec nos cadres dirigeants noirs. Je m'appelle Elisabeth Martin. Je suis la coprésidente du caucus fédéral des employés noirs ainsi qu'un membre clé du comité du réseau antiraciste. Nous sommes reconnaissants de travailler, de nous rencontrer et de vivre nos vies sur le territoire traditionnel des Premières Nations, des Métis et des Inuits du Canada. Nous reconnaissons qu'une grande partie de ces terres est non cédée. Joyce?
You're on mute, Joyce.
Joyce?
Sorry, is that better? Yes. Sorry, I keep having to remember to unmute myself. The technology of COVID. Okay, so sorry about that, everyone. I would like to welcome Maxine Eiffel to deliver some opening remarks for today's event. Ms. Eiffel is a Senior Director at Shared Service Canada and has held executive level positions in the federal public service since 2006. Ms. Eiffel has 10 years of private sector business marketing experience, managing quarterly marketing campaign with Bell Canada and conducting national customer research studies while at Canada Post. In her downtime, Ms. Eiffel enjoyed drawing, painting, and physical fitness pursuit. Liz, if you will introduce Ms. Eiffel in French, please.
Merci beaucoup. Aujourd'hui, je souhaiterais présenter Madame Maxine Ilfil. Madame Ilfil est directrice principale, stratégie de services et analyse de la Direction générale de la gestion des opérations des services partagés Canada. Madame Ilfil est titulaire d'une maîtrise en administration des affaires, en marketing et en commerce international de l'Université de McGill, ainsi que d'un baccalauréat avec mention en biochimie de l'Université d'Ottawa. Madame Ilfil est multilingue. Elle parle couramment l'anglais et le français et a un niveau intermédiaire en espagnol. Et maintenant, Madame Maxine Ilfil va se présenter. Welcome, Miss Ilfil. Please introduce yourself.
Merci beaucoup, Liz. Thank you, Joyce. Good afternoon et bon après-midi tout le monde. I'm thrilled to be here with you and looking forward to this discussion. This afternoon, we are fortunate we will have a window onto the career path and journeys of some Black senior leaders in the federal public service. Now, as we all know, in recent months since the killing of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests throughout North America, the UK, and beyond, there has been an increased focus on and much needed discussion around systemic racism faced by racialized people here in Canada, in particular, anti-Indigenous and anti-Black racism in our society and by extension in our workplaces. There's also the question of intersectionality, more acute barriers and discrimination faced when, for example, one is both racialized and differently abled. when we look at last summer and the impacts of the pandemic on the economy, unemployment was at 10.9% in Canada. But for Black women, it was 7.7 percentage points higher at 18.6%, while for Black men, it was 4.2 percentage points higher at 15.1. So the impact or double whammy of both gender and race. But today we will hear, despite the systemic barriers, anti-Black racism, question of intersectionality, we will hear how these leaders have overcome, have found mentors, been sponsored, and have realized and are continuing to realize their potential, each shining their light, their talent in the Canadian Federal Public Service. Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Eiffel. And isn't it alarming, everyone, to realize for Black women in general, I mean, Black men as well, but Black women, we are 18.6% unemployed. Let's stop and think about that for a minute before we go on. It's like, look at everyone around us. And now we have to understand why we have to stand up for change. Now, as we move forward to today's session, please share your comments on the chat space or post your question in the question Q&A button in the language of your choice. Liz?
Merci, Joyce. So, au fur et à mesure que nous progresserons dans la session d'aujourd'hui, veuillez partager vos questions en utilisant le bouton questions et réponses dans la langue de votre choix. Joyce?
Thank you, Liz. Today we have 4 panelists joining us. They will share their lived experience around their career choices, the path they've taken, as well as obstacles they've overcome on their journey. Liz?
Aujourd'hui, nous accueillons 4 panélistes. Ils partagent leur expertise, leur expérience vécue autour des choix de carrière et des parcours qu'ils ont empruntés, ainsi que les obstacles et les moyens utilisés pour les surmonter.
Thank you, Liz. Now let's meet our panelists and have them introduce themselves. So can we start with you, Roxanne?
Hi, thanks, Joyce. Good morning, everybody. My name is Roxanne Lee, and I'm currently the Executive Director for Citizen Services Branch with Service Canada in the Western Territories region, and I sit in Vancouver, British Columbia. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the Coast Salish territory of the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. I'm of Caribbean descent. Both of my parents hail from the beautiful island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I started my career in the public service in 2000 as a post-secondary recruit, first working as a communications consultant as I have a background in broadcast journalism. And from there had the opportunity to work in HR, finance, frontline operations, and investigations, to name a few, before landing in my current role. So I am very pleased to be here today to join you all and looking forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we'll go on to Darren, if you don't mind. Darren?
Sure, I put myself off of mute here. I'm Darren Ruck. Hope you can hear me. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia, born and raised. And for those who aren't aware, there's a strong Indigenous Black community in Nova Scotia. Originally came here as former slaves, as well as free people from the United States. We were sort of British citizens, if you will, at the time. So strong coming from that background. My father, actually, though, is his grandfather is from Barbados, so I have a strong Bajan history and culture as well. I enjoy the food. My career really started many years ago. In the late 1980s, I joined the Department of National Defense. At the time, I had a background in electronics, and I felt it would be a good place to be. Health, in fact, the National Defense is one of the hugest largest employers here in Halifax, and it wasn't far from where I lived, so it was a natural transition. The first job I had nothing to do with electronics, and I didn't like it. And I realized that I had an opportunity to apply for other jobs in the government. This is a great thing. So within a couple of years, I found myself as a supervisor for the first time. And I realized the level of responsibility I suddenly had. And I think early on, I understood that somewhat of a people approach was really what was needed to successfully manage people. I was a young Black man managing older white men primarily, right? So it was tricky, particularly back in the early 1990s. And you did feel you had to navigate that whole relationship. But I also learned a lot. I learned a lot of skills about people and what motivates them and what makes them tick. I actually left the public service for a number of years and went to the private sector. I had an interest in human resources and had an opportunity with the Bank of Nova Scotia to as a manager of HR for our Atlantic region for Scotiabank. So I seized that opportunity. I took what's called started off with an Interchange Canada program, but it turned into a full-time job. And I was there for about 12 years. And I, believe it or not, I came back to the public service only 12 years ago now, or 10 years ago, with Public Service Procurement Canada, where I've been primarily as a regional manager in Atlantic region. I'm now actually working in our headquarters, and although I'm still in Halifax, I report to our headquarters as a senior advisor in HR. So I provided a lot of advice on where our direction for diversity and our strategies around that. That's it in a nutshell.
Well, thank you. That was a lot you've done in their lifetime. And you know what? Later in this conversation, I hope we can get a lot of your past wisdom handed down to the audience. Now, if we would go next to Senna. Senna, if you would say a few words about yourself. And
je m'appelle Senna Paradis, je suis directrice de négociations à Relations Couronne Autochtone et Affaires du Nord à Colombie-Britannique. I was born into the Ewe tribe in Ghana, raised here in Vancouver, where I continue to live with gratitude on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. On one hand, being born abroad to a Canadian woman, I am an immigrant. I had to become a Canadian citizen. And at the same time, one of my maternal ancestors lived in BC before it even joined Confederation. And my grandmother was born in the Vancouver area. So I am an immigrant, but with very deep roots here, where I make my home in BC. I have a master's degree in public administration, a certificate in conflict resolution from the Justice Institute of BC, and a certificate in intercultural communications from the University of British Columbia. I've spent my whole career in the federal public service focused on reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. J'étais négociatrice pour la traité Mononve avec 5 Premières Nations sur la côte ouest de l'île de Vancouver et j'étais la négociatrice principale pour gérer les préparations interministérielles afin de mettre en vigueur le traité Claman 2016. I oversee about a dozen sets of negotiations across southern BC. And my team's current focus is on transforming the processes that we have to negotiate treaties and others agreements so that they are centered on recognition-based and collaborative approaches. Je suis mariée, j'ai un fils et une fille, et nous adorons voyager partout dans le monde. Nous espérons de continuer de voyager après la pandémie.
Sorry, I really hate that mute button now. Thank you, Senna. Sorry about that. As we are a bilingual nation, French and English, I will ask my co-moderator, Liz, to pose the question again and ask Heather to introduce herself. Liz, if you would go ahead, please. You're muted, Liz. Still on mute.
Excusez-moi. Finalement, last but not least, je vais demander à Madame Heather Hamilton de se présenter.
Merci tout le monde et merci pour l'opportunité de parler avec vous aujourd'hui, cet après-midi. I'm thrilled to see such a big audience here. So I am Heather Hamilton. I was born and raised in Canada, in Edmonton, to Jamaican parents. Now I should take this moment to say every useful thing I have ever done is because of my parents and their support. So that's important for me, for people to know that. I have spent almost my whole career in public service. I joined the public service straight out of high school with not the slightest idea what I wanted to do with my life. I began as a CR, I believe it was a CR3. I was the receptionist at the census office, and I discovered that the field of communications, because the communications officer quit, and my boss turned to me and said, "You're the communications officer until we hire someone else." And I really loved it. So I ended up pursuing that field, moved into the IS group and worked my way from IS2 through to IS6 and into the executive category. I worked for a while with the city of Edmonton. I served as an assistant deputy minister of comms at the province in Alberta for a while, but the majority of my career has been in the public service of Canada. And I'm astonished to realize this year will be 30 years since I joined the public service of Canada. So I've had a lot of opportunities. I've had some great mentors. I've dealt with some horrible people and some really wonderful people. It's been a great experience for me overall. In the same time, I should say, I have pursued a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in communications and technology. So that is my academic background, but I place a huge value on that practical time I've spent down in the trenches doing the work at all different levels of the organization. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Heather. And coming from a Jamaican background, I know the strength of the Jamaican mothers, or not only Jamaican mothers, but all Black mothers. And congratulations on your 30th anniversary. Now let's move on to the question, and we'll ask Liz first to pose the first question in French. As I said, we are a bilingual country. And Liz will be posing the first question actually in French to Heather, if that's okay with Heather.
Merci beaucoup, Heather. Voici ma question. Et c'est une question que tout le monde a en tête. Et beaucoup de personnes voudraient savoir votre réponse. Avez-vous déjà été confronté au racisme anti-noir sur le lieu du travail? Si oui, comment avez-vous surmonté ce racisme anti-noir?
Thank you. Merci pour la question. I have found, of course, would be the short answer, is of course I have faced that at different points in my career. I have, I think, had much more support than opposition, but I think I have had to overcome just low expectations in many places. I've had to fight a little bit to be acknowledged and to be given credit for my own accomplishments. I think what has been important for me, and a lesson from a wonderful mentor I had early on, is you need to be confident in yourself. Other people are going to challenge and question you. Other people are going to wonder if you are qualified and competent. You can't also be wondering and if you are competent. So I come back to, I believe it's Churchill who said, confidence is only the secure feeling that so far no one else is suspicious. Go boldly and be confident in what you're saying. It became important to me, and I stress, we live and work in a place and a time where the law and the policy is in our favor. We are required to be treated fairly and equitably. Our policies say that all positions should be staffed on a merit basis. So the policy supports us. And that's really important. It's not very long ago that the law of the land worked to the contrary. So for me, it's been important to lean on that and to raise that question and, you know, sometimes let it sit in an uncomfortable way. So when someone has said to me, well, I don't think you're a good fit for that role, why not? And we let that hang. They have to have a good answer, and the answer can't be because I see you're a Black woman and I figure that means you can't do it. There has to be a substantive answer, and you can definitely use that policy to support you. I would also say, don't be afraid to go around people who are in your way. If you are willing to do that, if your point is well substantiated, you will often have success in that way. And I would say on a day-to-day basis, just learning little coping tools for the situation. One of my very first management roles, one of my challenges was I would bring forward an idea at the management table and it would sit like a lead balloon. And a moment later, someone else would make the exact same suggestion. Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go. One of my mentors said to me, why don't you ask that question? So I've learned to innocently ask, I'm sorry, can you help me understand how that's different from what I just said? I'm not seeing what the difference in that is. And many times people will say, well, it doesn't really matter whose idea it is. To which my response is, evidently it does, or it wouldn't be a better idea now that someone else has said it. So I would just say going forward confidently, asking for what you want, using the policy where it is available to support you, and asking those kinds of questions. Why can't I do this? What is it that you're looking for? Why am I not the right person for that opportunity? Why are you not considering me for this role? You have to get a substantive answer, and it makes it a bit more of a challenge for people who are willfully being racist. They have fewer corners to hide because of the support of that policy.
Je vous remercie,
So I think those are
Heather,
the main ones.
pour ces mots. Effectivement, il est important pour tout le monde d'entendre qu'il est important, en fait, de poser des questions, de ne pas accepter des réponses qui n'ont pas de sens et de demander, en fait, des réponses qui sont claires et qui justifient les raisons pour lesquelles nous ne progressons pas. Merci beaucoup. Joyce?
Thank you. Now I'll address the same question that Heather's just answered for us to the rest of the panel. Have you ever faced anti-Black racism in the workplace? And if yes, how did you move forward? So let's start with Darren on this one.
Well, I don't know if I can add a whole lot to Heather's answer. I was listening intently, and I think her experiences resonate for me in many ways. What I'll say is that, through your career, the advice that I would give is look for mentors, look for allies, and they can be anywhere, and they may not necessarily be a member of your team, or they may not necessarily even be in your own department, but they can be there. And you have to recognize the attributes of someone who sees you for who you see yourself. So as Heather alluded to, you have to be confident in yourself. Well, surround yourself with people. With my dog, I'm sorry. Surround yourself with people who have that same feeling about you. Who trust your decisions, who trust your abilities, and so on. And stick by those people, because those are the people that are going to help support. There's people you're going to put on your resume as your references, for example, right? In a practical sense, right? And so maintain those relationships that you see as positive and support you who you are. Some of the things that I've done, but in terms of direct racism in a workplace, of course. But you know what? I choose to spend my energy developing my own skills as opposed to fighting that stupid person who sees me only for the color of my skin, right? If I can avoid that person, I tend to do that. So the energy typically is not worth it. But yeah,
thank you, Darren.
that's my thought.
So what I'm getting from this is that pick the battles you can fight, look for allies. So don't waste energy fighting battles that are useless and goes nowhere if it's just the one person who you're not going to change their mind anyway. So move forward. Am I correct? Okay. So let's go next to Roxanne. Let's hear from Roxanne on this.
Thanks, Joyce. So yeah, echoing very, very closely to what Heather and Darren have already said, have I faced anti-Black racism in the workplace? Absolutely. But in terms of moving forward, again, highlighting some of Heather's comments, it really was about that confidence piece, that whether it was because you had to overcome or I had to overcome low expectations, or the opposite, people expecting you to do all these wonderful things because I was the token Black person. And because of that, all these wonderful things were supposed to come to me. It was knowing that whatever I earned, whatever came to me, was because I did that, not because of what other people were putting on me. And so again, it's that confidence piece that you always have to believe in yourself and know that no matter the reasons why you get somewhere, you're there. And once you're there, you have the opportunity to use your voice to further impact future change. So I've always carried that with me. And is a big reason why I found myself in leadership, because early in my career, I remember they put up a picture of all of our senior leaders. And to say that there was no one that looks like me is an understatement. Not only did nobody look like me, there wasn't even anybody of color. And I'm talking, this was 60 people on the screen. And I remember saying to myself, knowing how I felt, I didn't want other people to feel that way when they looked at the picture, that even if it was just my one little Black face staring out at them, they could see themselves in me. And part of that, again, echoing some of Heather's comments in terms of overcoming the obstacles, here in BC, the Black community is very, very, very small. To work in a building with another Black person is unique, much less working in the same unit or workspace with another Black person. And so from a networking perspective and being able to, you know, talk to people about your experiences, I didn't have that. And so it's my family and my community that I often turn to get that support. And I think that's really important, that whatever your network looks like Darren said, that's where you can build your confidence to reassure yourself at those times where you need reassuring that, yeah, you deserve to be here, and don't let anybody ever take that away from you.
Thank you, Roxanne. So be strong is the message to everyone. Be strong and keep going. Okay, so last but not least, let's hear from Sana.
Merci. Et pour répondre en bref, le racisme anti-noir est une réalité dans la société, donc au travail aussi. In the workplace, I've experienced relatively few overt incidents. However distressing those have been, the biggest challenge has been the impact, the immediate impact, and then the accumulated impact of those more subtle slights that create a sense of otherness, which are a window into a deeper unconscious bias that pervades society and the public service. Name calling and racial slurs have been endured outside the public service, but under the white gaze in the workplace, white people have asked to touch my hair, asked about the impact of my race on my work, asked in Vancouver, Vancouverites asked me about my accent, which they, I think, are trying to reconcile with what they're hearing based on how I look. And many people have leaked their confusion, verbally, non-verbally, about their surprise that I actually do the work that I do. And they have asked what do I actually do in negotiations, as if I couldn't possibly be doing what the title implied. I choose again and again not to let the negativity define me. There's a theme of confidence here in our conversation this morning, and I'm going to zoom in a bit on that piece because people do perceive me as confident and calm. I get that a lot, and I thought about, well, where does that really come from? The path to overcome these obstacles and stay positive is not always clear, and it has to be self-defined to suit your own lived experience. But key pieces for me to succeed in this context have been centered on three directions, looking to the past, present, and future, le passé, le présent, et l'avenir. So I'll take a few minutes on each of those. First, the past. As I step into spaces where I'm unexpected, I stand on the shoulders of others of African heritage who came before me, and I take my place to creating a better future. First and foremost, my gratitude is to Indigenous peoples, stewards of this beautiful place on Earth. And though Canada does have a rich history, it actually is a relatively new country by world standards. And all of us, except Indigenous peoples, arrived as immigrants at some point. White Canadians tend to be less defined by their status as immigrant. It's much more likely you'll be perceived and defined as an immigrant by others negatively with an immigrant status if you're a visible minority, no matter how long your family has been in Canada. And it's important for me to contradict that mainstream history and the resulting perceptions of me with knowledge that Black people have contributed across the board in making Canada and to leading us to what is our best potential. So finding those parts of history that speak to contributions of others of African descent grounds me in leading in the present. As I said, as a federal treaty negotiator leading teams, I've had looks of curiosity, surprise, frankly, insulting questions about my actual role. And I have to earn my way to the starting point in interactions until my conduct has a chance to override the stereotypes and the unconscious bias of those around me. But in terms of the past, I'm speaking to you from British Columbia, which joined Canada under the leadership of a man of African and Scottish roots, just like me. Sir James Douglas, who led the 2 colonies of Vancouver Island and British Columbia into Canada, was born in British Guyana to a colored woman who probably looked something like me. His father was a white Scottish man. It was his Scottish heritage for sure that allowed him to ascend in leadership, but the fact remains that African roots run through the history of BC, just as they ran through his veins. Married to an Indigenous woman, Douglas invited and welcomed Black settlers from the US. Though many of them went back south when they discovered it wasn't as welcoming as he might have been, many of them stayed to contribute to this province. And out of a very, very long list of those, a few were on my mind as I prepared. Thinking of Douglas himself in the entry into Confederation, City Councillor Mifflin Gibbs was part of the delegation to draw up the terms for BC's entry into Confederation. The Salt Spring Island and Saanich pioneers, Barkerville residents like Alan Jones, who was the first licensed dentist in BC, athlete and educator Barbara Howard, Vancouver train station porters like Mozart Mims, athlete Harry Jerome, athlete and politician Emery Barnes, and Rosemary Brown, first Black Canadian woman elected to the provincial legislature, member of the Order BC, member of Order Canada, all those among her other distinctions. And musician Leon Bibb, who I mentioned because I happen to live in the house he once inhabited. Knowledge of others who came before me really does help me hold my head high as I enter into spaces where my appearance still makes me unexpected at best. And more briefly about the present, I have to remember it's not really about me most of the time. I have to focus on what I can control. There are systems and processes at play over which I have no control. I was born into a world where my parents' marriage was illegal in most places. It was at best frowned upon, and racism remains a reality that many don't see or acknowledge, even as the polarization has brought it into focus in recent years. But what I can control are the spaces that I step into, how I enter those spaces, how I conduct myself, how and where I exercise the influence in spaces where my own privilege around education and other things creates opportunity for me. I do my best to own each day and to not be defined by those painful incidents. My deputy minister, Daniel Kwan-Watson, recently wrote a powerful letter about his lived experience that confirms that no title will insulate visible minorities from the realities of racism. Mon sous-ministre, Daniel Kwan-Watson, a écrit une lettre publiée au sujet de son expérience vécue. Son expérience a des similarités avec la mienne et plusieurs d'autres fonctionnaires. Steeped in this context, internalized racism becomes another additional challenge that I and many in other equity-seeking groups have to continue to battle with vigilance. I want to support a public service where staff can bring their fuller selves to contribute with a variety of lenses and experiences. And lastly, the future, l'avenir. J'ai confiance en les fonctionnaires plus jeunes que moi qui peuvent continuer les efforts sur le long terme. Ceux qui ne sont pas des sujets qu'on règle vite. Ce sont des problèmes multigénérationnels qui devront encore être réglés dans les années à l'avenir. And we're each here for a finite time. So find a vision for yourself, what you want to contribute, where you want to end up, what you want to be your legacy. For me, my commitment to social justice drew me to improving the lives of Indigenous people and building teams to carry on improving the relationship in the next generations. So finding a good fit between my interests and my work kept me motivated in spite of the challenges. If you're a Black public servant watching or listening today, get ready. I believe the government is serious about change, so prepare yourself. I did my best to lead in whatever role I was in with an eye to where I wanted to be and kept stepping forward for promotions and acting opportunities. And continuous leadership is a key value for me. I kept looking ahead to what I thought I would need to perform well, taking advantage of training opportunities inside and outside the public service. And this came together over many years, not just a few. So patience and tenacity are very, very important. I've needed to rebuild and maintain my stamina and resilience, taking breaks, self-care, mindfulness practice, getting out of Canada for international travel for context. And there are steps that give me hope for the future. La directive sur l'équité en matière d'emploi, la diversité et l'inclusion du Conseil du Trésor du Canada datant avril 2020 exige que les sous-ministres nomment un fonctionnaire responsable du développement un plan d'action complet en collaboration avec les groupes recherchant l'équité. Ce plan d'action inclut l'objectif accroître la représentation. So deputies are being tasked with establishing cultures of inclusiveness, diversity, and will combat racism and address systemic barriers, as well as increasing representation at all levels and looking at policies and programs that will be inclusive and free of barriers. So this helps me give me hope for the future.
Thank you, Sana, for that. So what I'm hearing you say, you lean on the strength of your ancestors. You hold your vision tightly to your heart. So your vision of moving forward and the hope for the future, as well as the attitude you bring to everything. That's, you know, a strong positive attitude, knowing that you can't control what other people think or say is what leads you going forward. Am I correct in saying that? Thank you. So now, before we go on to the second question, we do have quite a few questions coming in from the panel, from the audience. And if I could stop for a moment and maybe just pose one or two questions to the panel. So someone would like to know, and quote, I see so many big BIPOC groups. Sorry, I see so many BIPOC groups and call for diversity roles. However, I also see Caucasian people, mostly male, being hired into these positions. How frustrating. How can women better position themselves to stand out and secure positions that are meant to diversify the workforce? So how can we as women better position ourselves? How can we as visible minority, Black women or women in general, position ourselves in the workforce to, keeps flipping, to move ahead? And let's pose this question to Heather first, and then we'll ask Roxanne.
That is frustrating, and I'm always disappointed when I see that. I think one very important thing to do is to get in front of that hiring. Once someone has already announced, here's the person who's occupying that position, you've missed your window. So I think this again speaks to being confident and being in front of that. So I notice you're looking for this position. What are you looking for in that position? And I'm letting you know that I'm interested in it. And being able to bring yourself forward before you have a final decision that's in place like that. That though depends on always having clarity on how you are performing at the time. So backing up from that, I would say you should be asking for regular feedback on your position. You should be, I meet with my own boss every 2 weeks, and every 2 weeks I ask him, are you satisfied with my performance? If you're not, I want to hear it now. I don't want to hear it after you gave the job to somebody else. I want to hear now about it and work on it. And you need to keep asking that question until you hear I'm totally satisfied with everything that you're doing. Then when you go to apply for your next position, you have something to lean on. Well, last week you said I was doing a great job. So what is the obstacle that you now see to me being moved forward in that role? I can't tell you how many times that has saved me. And it's holding people to account. If you've said I got an issue in this area, I have now fixed that area. So you know, what next shall you bring to the table? So you want to make sure as you're coming in confidently that you can back it up. You can deliver on the things that you're saying you can deliver, and that you've positioned yourself in advance for those those opportunities and those positions, and also made it difficult for people who are hiring into those positions to say, you're not qualified. I was qualified last week when I asked you if you were happy with my performance. How am I not qualified now? So I would say it's just being in front, being there, positioning yourself before those hiring decisions are made, and making yourself a little bit bulletproof by having established a record of strong performance. I will say, dealing with a really difficult situation I had, where I was applying for a new position and I was shocked to discover that I was not getting good references from my own supervisor. And my solution to that was to actually share my entire performance appraisal for that position. And I ended up getting that role. So you do kind of insulate yourself from sort of a momentary flare. If you have no record behind you, someone can come along and go, oh, well, I've had an issue with Heather for years. She's been underperforming. And you really don't have any way to oppose that point.
Thank you,
So in
Heather.
short, I would say get ahead of it. Just be ahead of that announcement.
Okay, all right. So Roxanne, do you have anything you'd like to add? I mean, I believe Heather's comment was all inclusive, really. But if you have something you would like to add at this time, it would be great.
Yeah, no, Heather had a very comprehensive response, certainly from the perspective of, control what you can control in terms of what you bring to the table. Just to add a different angle to that from an HR perspective. The other angle is find ways to find yourself on the other side of that hiring board. And so for me, that took the guise of actually working in HR for a period of time as both a consultant and then as a leader, so that when opportunities came to sit on hiring boards, because again, I'll be candid in saying the reason why our tables look the way that they do is because like hires like. You have a certain affinity. And so the comment referenced, you see a lot of white males. Well, at the hiring boards, who's sitting there? And there's a certain affinity that's there. And so that's the whole point of the diversity piece, is to create that sense of comfort, that sense of community, that understanding that when somebody comes to the table and they may be sitting and they don't make eye contact, well, that could be a cultural piece. And so I think the more of us that we can get into those positions, whether it's through a formal career in HR or even informally, finding a way to mentor or sit on different hiring boards, that's another way that we can support each other in terms of being able to bring that voice to the table when we look at providing input in terms of who we bring into either our organization or as we move within our organization, also having that diversity.
Thank you, Roxanne. So now let's move on before taking another question. Let's move on to the second question that we would like our panels to address. So Roxanne, starting with you, since you're already there, we all work hard at our jobs. We have the education. Many of us have the necessary experience. How did mentoring, networking, sponsorship, and stretch assignment help you get ahead in your career?
Yeah, mentoring has been a huge, huge part of my career. And I'll go so far as to say I would not be sitting in the chair I have today if not for the mentors that I had in place. So very early in my career, I actually adopted mentors. And so I actively sought people out who, from a leadership perspective, I aspired to some of the qualities that I saw them exhibit. In one case, it was a woman who was very strong in terms of how her leadership was. In another case, it was a man in terms of the way that he was able to deal with his teams. Again, I looked for various people that, in terms of building a leadership portfolio, who had qualities I could aspire to. Those are the people that I wanted to mentor. And I wanted to mentor me. And I think when a lot of people hear the term mentoring, we get stuck in the idea of a formal mentor, that it's one person that you go to, you sit down with them once a week or once a month, and you have that conversation and you go on your way. And I actually think mentoring and networking are very closely tied, because you're going to have different mentors for different reasons. And again, I would actively encourage people, it's not just about your senior leaders. A lot of people have said, well, I don't have a DG I can go to or a director. Some of my best mentors have been managers or even colleagues who, for a variety of reasons, they're very happy in their position, but have a wealth of knowledge to be able to share with me as I've navigated different situations in my career. Mentors were also able to facilitate opportunities for me. So they were able to give me advice in terms of taking lateral moves. So for example, I started in communications. I then took a lateral move to HR. And from there was able to get a promotional opportunity into management because I built my resume in terms of HR and communication skills. Sometimes they've actually been able to hire me into positions where, because we've had that informal relationship, speaking to the question that we spoke to earlier, again, it's sometimes about who you know. They were able to offer me assignments that I could then parlay into that experience. And so when the board came up, now to Heather's point that she mentioned, I didn't give them a reason to not hire me. So the other piece I'd actually say too is there's value to be learned from the people you don't want to be like. So we always look for the mentors who are going to influence us positively. I've actually learned a lot from the people who I'm looking at that leader saying, there's no way I'd ever treat my people like that. And I take note and I remember that, because that's not the type of leader I'd like to be. So all that to say, and Darren mentioned this earlier, would highly encourage people to seek out mentorship. Again, it doesn't always have to be a senior person. It could be a colleague. I saw one of the questions in terms of asking if I've had the opportunity to mentor with a Black colleague. I would say up until 4 months ago, simply didn't have that network. That wasn't an opportunity available to me. We now have the Black Executive Network that meets. And so I've been able to meet a number of leaders there. And that's been a great place, again, to potentially look for leaders. So again, I haven't had the experience of mentoring with Black leadership as yet, but now that we've got these various networks in place, I think those opportunities will definitely present themselves.
Thank you very much, Roxanne, for what you said, because I can completely relate to that. I am here as the co-chair of FBEC, the Federal Black Employee Caucus, and the BC chapter, but I would say that I learn a lot through FBEC, but also through Darren, the Anti-Racism Ambassador Network. And if it were not for my peers there, Ali, Alia, Glenn, Bara, Sarah, I wouldn't be standing here, because the opportunities that unfortunately I could not have access to through my day-to-day job, they give them to me. So unfortunately, people only focus on the high executives, but you can learn also a lot from your peers. And thank you also for saying that we can learn what not to do as well by observing around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, for that. So Darren, would you like to chime in on this question as well? Or?
Well, I don't know if there's much again that I can add, because some smart people here. And you know, and I agree with everything that's been said. You know, be able to recognize again the people who will support your career or support you. They are your mentors, right? And ask questions and seek advice and model positive behavior, and avoid that behavior that you've seen that is not positive, you know, as Roxanne referred to. I think I've done that, reflecting on it, most of my career. And I don't know that I've done it always intentionally, but, you know, when you see somebody or a leader that's not doing the right things, you know, there's a mental model there that says, you know, that's not me. You know, I'm not going to be that kind of a leader. And you know, I've always tried personally to build positive relationships. So, you know, taking an active approach, being sort of a relationship builder, understanding other people, what motivates them, you know, why do they come to work every day? If you're a manager, understanding that talent comes in different forms, you know, and your team, I manage a team like a baseball team. Not everybody's got the pitching arm, right? So, you know, some people are better catchers, right? So understanding the dynamics and the skill sets that you have on your team, and particularly what's missing, you know, if there is a skill set that's not there, how do I get that skill set on my team? I think those are important attributes for a leader. But again, personally, I've learned from others. It's all been what I've learned from others.
Thank you, Darren. So let's go to the audience for another. Sorry.
I was just sorry to interrupt. Can I just jump in with a really quick point?
Yes.
On mentoring. I got a great piece of advice early in my career, and that was build yourself a board of directors. So you see someone who has a lot of expertise on HR, make a note of that. They're now your vice president of HR. You got a question related to HR, you go back, hi, hey, Roxanne, I know you work in HR and I got a question I need some help with. Find someone who works in finance, find somebody who works in comms, find somebody who works in policy, build yourself your own sort of set of referral people who have expertise in different subjects, and don't lose the soft skills. I worked with a very junior employee who was brilliant at just emotional intelligence, maybe is the right way of describing it. And she was an IS4, and I continued to seek her advice even as an EX2 because she had much better insight on how people function than I actually do. So that was a great tip. I just really wanted to share. Build yourself a board of directors and don't be shy to contact them and say, I got a question that's up your alley and I'd like to know what you think.
Okay, Sana, thank you, Heather. Sana, would you like to add anything to this question?
No, I think that's good. I think we've got another question coming up on mentoring and coaching. And I have a couple comments there, but no, I think we would just carry on a question from the audience, I think he said.
Yeah, so I think this question I'm about to ask of the panel is basically, we've just answered it. The person would like to know, is anyone on the panel opening to mentoring new employees, or is there a mentorship program in place we can access? So does anyone know, is anyone, both speakers or guests, open to mentoring new employees, or do we know of any mentorship program within the public service that they would have access to? And we'll start, Sana, since you're there, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm not actually aware of the formal mentoring networks. I have been asked by some people to mentor them informally, which I've done over the years. And it's been a co-learning experience, very much me learning from those who are seeking to be mentored by me as well. Je viens de commencer une spécialisation en coaching et la sagesse de mes clients noirs est très impressionnante. Je voudrais que la fonction publique bénéficie de leurs enthousiasmes et leur vigueur. I have an interest in continuing to coach Black young public servants and invisible minorities. So it's probably fine to just reach out to me and see when there might be an opportunity for me to do at least a brief series of sessions.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to chime in on that question? Whether or not they would like to mentor new employees in their organization, or if they know of any mentorship program in place that they can access.
Darren here. I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, please, Darren.
I was just saying that I'm aware of, and I'm just trying to find the link for it, but I believe Public Service Commission is coming out with I believe that's a central agency. It's coming out with a new mentorship and sponsorship initiative that departments can, a template that departments can use. I've been part of developing mentorship programs in the past, and there's some pros and cons as well too when it comes to formal mentorship. We've tried successfully in our department, done some group mentoring, which was I felt was quite effective and it reached a lot of different people. I would encourage you to ask the question of your department. I want to be mentored. What programs do you have established? And be persistent. If there's a void there, it needs to be filled. I think there should be a menu of options for employees, including individual mentorship as well as group mentorship programs. But never forget that informal mentorships can be the most powerful and rewarding as well.
Thank you. Now, Heather, if we're going to chime in.
Sorry, Heather.
Well, thank you. I was just going to say, I can be a challenge for people to take on that big sort of grand formal mentoring role, but I have never reached out to anyone with a question or an issue or seeking a bit of advice who said no. So I think it can be, you know, building a formal mentoring relationship is a bigger time investment, but I think there's a lot of people around you who have advice and can help you on particular issues or can coach you on particular questions or things that you're thinking about without going into that formal kind of mentoring role. Most people are, when you're building your little board of directors, most people are extremely flattered to have been identified as an expert in their field and are very happy to provide you with that kind of support without getting into that formal mentoring role.
Thank you. Liz, I believe you. Thank you, Heather. Sorry about that. Liz, I believe you have your hand up.
Yes, and thank you very much. There is a question. First of all, I wanted to say there is a new group, FODJO, FODJO group, and that is new and is dedicated to coach and mentor talented Black employees. So I wanted to ask a question from the audience. Basically, women wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to speak to us today. And here is our question. I am steps away from being appointed to an EX1, the first Black female in an executive team of more than 30 individuals. Mindful of being the first, what advice do you have for new executives in terms of setting themselves up for success? Who would like to answer this question?
I can jump in, Liz. So I very much appreciate that question because I found myself in that situation when I described seeing our leadership team. I'd say kind of things at a general level, trust your gut. And when I say trust your gut, what I mean is don't be afraid to be your authentic self and speak your truth. I think a lot of us, when you come to work, we exist, and certainly I felt this growing up in BC, you exist in a kind of cultural duality. And so when I go to work, I'm still Roxanne, I'm still Black, I'm still of Caribbean descent, but in a different way. My coworkers experience me in a different way than maybe my family, my community would. And at times it's trying to reconcile those two parts of you and bringing your full self to work. And so one of the techniques I kind of joke with my staff is, do you want Government of Canada Roxanne, who's going to give you the Government of Canada response? Or do you want Street Roxanne, who's going to give you the straight up real goods, personal life Roxanne? And so in creating that space, it's allowed me to bring more of my authentic self to the role. I also find a lot of times at the table when issues of racialized peoples come up, we're talking about Black employees. And I joke with my kids, for them, it's when slavery comes up, every white head in the room turns to them and kind of looks at you. And to some degree, you do have to get a little comfortable with how are you going to respond? And part of the way I've addressed that is to acknowledge, not just for myself, but that my colleagues also understand for their Black employees that all of us are on different parts of the spectrum. I have reconciled that in my position, I am comfortable addressing certain questions, speaking about lived experiences, but other colleagues may not. And so again, when I say speak your truth, it's finding a way to be comfortable with speaking that truth about who you are and what you want to bring to the table. Because in that way, you're creating your space so people know how to approach you as opposed to not knowing what to say. So are you Black? Are you African Canadian? Are you this? Are you that? You define those parameters and use your voice, your authentic self to be able to do that. In saying that, it's not an easy thing. I think it's something that most of us would struggle with daily, but in terms of being true to yourself, if you can find that space, I think it creates a frame for you to be able to operate kind of comfortably within that role of being the first.
Thank you, Roxanne. I believe Heather also would like to chime in. I see your hands up. Hannah.
I was just going to add maybe 2 points. Get to know your colleagues and reach out. It's lonely. It can be lonely at the top, and it's really important for you to have peers that you can talk to and bounce ideas from and interact with, and also people who can help you to understand some of the dynamics and the office politics, if you will, that are happening at your particular executive table. I would also say, just because you come there, you're bringing a certain degree of other with you when you arrive at the table, to be conscious about speaking from within the group. and giving people an opportunity to support what you're saying. And that is maybe a subtle way of saying, come in with an assumption that people will support you and an assumption that they're going to give people the benefit of the doubt and present your comments in that way. So it can be as subtle as the difference between saying, well, why aren't we considering a candidate from a diverse group? That's not something we've done before, as opposed to, well, you have never hired anybody up to now, right? So speaking from within the group, I think we have an opportunity to develop someone who we may not have considered, or I'm wondering if we have missed this angle. So just speaking from within the group and giving people an opportunity to go, yeah, I'm with you. We are a we, and I am with you is really, really important. So really cultivate the art of the perfectly innocent question. Really, why have we not? I'm wondering why we haven't considered this before. Is really, really important.
Thank you, Heather.
Tips I wish I'd had early on at the exec table.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Now we'll go to Liz, as I said, which will be posing a question to Sana in French. On procès. Liz?
Thank you very much. I think we will switch a little bit what we had planned because we have such an engaged audience. So if you don't mind, let me ask this question from the audience to all our panelists. How do you navigate or approach situations where you believe colleagues or supervisors are being influenced by their unconscious bias in the way they interact with you or treat you, but don't explicitly say anything anti-Black or anti-Black racist? Well, basically what we would like to know is, what is your best recommendation to handle microaggression in the workplace and this unassumed anti-Black racism? Because as you know, we all have a Black friend, a Black dog, a Black cat, and we don't have anything against anti-Blackness. Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll start. Liz, you're asking the panelists?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I would say unconscious bias is the thing that has affected me absolutely the most in my life. Canadians are exceedingly polite and pleasant, and I think often very unaware of the impact that they're creating. Having strong interpersonal skills that can apply across the board is good, and it's important because there will be difficult conversations. And reading about what it's like on the other side, there's a book called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, which is written by a white woman about what that experience is to defend and try to maintain one's positive self-image of oneself when confronted with the realities that, frankly, all of us have absorbed racism in this society. That's why I mentioned the internalized racism. Because these are just things that are so blended in with Canadian society that are mostly invisible. Most people will be unaware, and if they're unaware, then there's an education piece. They want to maintain their, build the awareness. So our department has actually started some training around unconscious bias. The idea that it's unconscious means that by its definition, it is a partnership. It can't be done alone. So people can't deal with it themselves. And not everybody's willing or able to be a partner in someone's journey on that. But it is important to find opportunities to at least highlight and acknowledge what's going on. I will say that there have been other times when I've had to make firmer comments where lines were crossed that I felt that they needed to be addressed in a stronger way. For most of the other things, I find that, talking it through, but deciding up front that this is going to be a safe space for that conversation, always asking, you open to some feedback, because not everybody is going to be open to the feedback, but where you find those people who are open to feedback, make sure you come equipped and prepared for some of those difficult conversations. I read something in a UN report of 2017 that was quite critical of Canada's anti-Black racism, that said that it was so enmeshed in our society and our culture so as to be invisible to the people in it. And that really is my experience. The impact, though, the impact is felt.
Thank you, Senna. So we will go to what I'm considering to be, looking at the time, our last question. And then after that, we will take some additional questions from the audience. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, so this question is actually to everyone on the panel today. So, what legacy do you wish to leave behind? Now, as human beings, we go to work, we do everything, we want to leave a legacy or a piece of ourselves behind. So, what legacy does each of you would like to leave behind? And secondly, and the second part of that question is, what advice would you give to a new or potentially Black public servants? And that in itself will answer some of our questions that we're seeing on the panels today. So let's start with Darren on this one.
Sure. Legacy. You can hear me. Well, as you get closer to the end of your career, you do think more about your legacy, right? So I've had the opportunity to do that, and I believe that if I was to have one, I'd want people to consider it, is that I've taken the opportunity and/or spent the time to get to know others, and to the point where I've had opportunities to help others develop their careers, find them jobs. For example, when I was with Scotiabank, I was primarily a recruiter, so I recruited more than my share of Black folk into the bank, right? And for everyone that I recruited, I had a smile, and I still smile today to know that they're still being successful. So I think you need to look back and have basically an accounting of who you've, because we've been all helped. Everybody here on this line has been helped throughout their career at some points in their career. And what have you given back? What have you given back? And I think you want to look back and say that you've given back at least as much as you've received, right? And hopefully more. And so that would be the legacy. The advice that I have for younger Black public servants is, and it has been said in many forms today, is be yourself. Be your authentic self. I think Roxanne said, whether or not you're applying for an EX job or just a CR5, I shouldn't say just, but be yourself. And if you're entering in, look for opportunities, again, build relationships with people who could potentially support your career advancement. Learn French, or learn another language, or learn the English if you're Francophone. It's clearly one of those things that that's going to help or hinder your career if you don't have. And respect other people as you would like to be respected yourself, and demand that respect from others that you're prepared to give to them. And you'll always come across, I think, throughout your career, some delicate situations where people may be disrespectful, that jerk manager, that narcissist, there are narcissists everywhere, particularly in leadership. They're disproportionately represented in leadership. So beware of that. Know the signs and get out if that's what it comes to, find yourself a different environment. Take care of yourself as number one. That's it.
Thank you very much. Who else would like to answer this question?
I can jump in. I think to Black public servants out there, I mean, I've spoken about where I get some of my foundation, and that's knowing my history. I mean, really, the mainstream is not going to tell you a history that is necessarily going to be as supportive as you will need for the difficulties of the task ahead of advancing through the public service. Find your own story. Tell your own narrative, take charge of it in the way that you want it to come out. You're writing your own story. Take up space and use it well. So do the training that you need to be good at intercultural communication. That's what this is. And it won't be the only kind of, we're not talking simply black, white here. Those are a skill set that really the government needs overall. So it's really important piece. Practice self-care to support and build your resilience, because it is not easy. We are not limitless in how much we can take, and the invisible impacts are impacts nonetheless. They are very real. Get uncomfortable with yourself and stay reflective about your own role as a colonizer here in Canada and your own bias and prejudice that you, like others, have absorbed. And maybe that helps you reflect on what the other person, what might resonate with the other person. Particularly if you've read that White Fragility book. Find your friends and allies and networks and appreciate them, because they are true gifts on this journey. If you're not a Black person and you're listening to this, I'd encourage you to do the same in terms of training around intercultural and difficult conversations. And to, if you have to be prepared to be uncomfortable. It is not possible to do the deep work without feeling uncomfortable. So what are the ways that you can build your own resilience and courage to enter into conversations that can truly be transformative in terms of the culture? Staying open to feedback, cultivating relationships where it's safe to make mistakes and get the feedback. And avoid prioritizing your good intentions or the good person that you think you are above the impact, because yes, we all want to feel that we're good and non-racist when we have done something that impacts another and they let us know, to really be reflective on that piece and be committed to adjusting it. And don't underestimate the value of just a heartfelt apology, the acknowledgement, not questioning people's lived experiences. Those pieces I think are all important. So speaking to two potential groups in the audience today.
Thank you, Senna. So would Heather or Roxanne like to chime in on this question as well? So we'll
Sure,
start with Heather and then we'll go to
that.
Roxanne. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks.
Sorry, Heather.
I was just going to say, I think we're overlapping, just a bit of time delay. I think it's important. I mean, yes, as you get to the end of your career, you do start thinking about legacy and sort of what you would like to leave behind. I hope that I have in some way influenced workplaces to just be better workplaces with happier people. I don't think that you should go to work and be miserable for 8 hours a day. And I feel like there are way too many people doing that. I've lived that circumstance. And, when I became a manager, my vow was I will never inflict that on anyone else. I don't want to have any employees who are watching the clock and counting the moments until they can get out of this horrible place and, go to somewhere where they feel comfortable. And I hope that that is something of my legacy. I think in terms of things to think about as you begin your career is pick your battles. Pick your battles and don't let people rent space in your head. Not everybody's opinion matters. Not every fight needs fighting. And to Senna's point, just practice a bit of self-care. It's a big burden to always have to be carrying the flag and the banner. None of us signed up to be Norma Ray and picket Parliament Hill, and right, this is for most of us is an involuntary role that you get handled because as Roxanne said, every head is going to swivel around to you, right, and look for you to have some bit of genius on any issue that relates to equity. So pick your battles. Not everybody matters, and not every issue matters, and you speak up where it's important. I would also just say that make sure you are satisfied with your own contribution. Early in my career, when I would come home, my dad would ask me, have the people of Canada gotten their money's worth today? Right? It's a good day if I can say, yes, I've done the best that I could do today. And I'm satisfied with that. And what you can do is all you can do. So just be the best that you can be. Make sure you're bringing your best self. Look after yourself, and you're not responsible for fixing the entire world, just doing what you can with your little piece of it.
Thank you, Heather. Roxanne, would you like to chime in? Last but not least.
Thank you. No, great comments by all of my colleagues on the panel. The one thing I'd say for me, And just that kind of shows in my career in terms of the various places I've landed is I'm kind of about the systems. And so to Heather's point, we're here too many hours in a day to not have fun is the number one thing I say. If I can't laugh and have a good time here, then that's not a good place to be. And not every day is about jokes and smiles and rainbows and unicorns, but you really want to enjoy the place that you work. And if I can create that space for my colleagues and employees, that definitely is part of the legacy I want to leave behind. But in tandem with that, it's also forcing people to think differently. Case in point, I had a conversation with a colleague the other day around non-advertised processes. And this colleague was very supportive of, this person got there based on advertised processes, and that's the most transparent way to do things. And I said, that's one way of looking at it. Or like we've talked about on this panel previously, that in and of itself can be a barrier when I sit across from you, but I don't fit the mold of what you're expecting. Ergo, therefore, why the Public Service Employment Act gives us the authority to be able to use different hiring practices. And I find internally, we set up a lot of internal barriers and policies and procedures that actually preclude our ability to be able to diversify our population. And so as part of my legacy, if I can bring that to the attention of my colleagues, we can't change necessarily the laws and the rules. I know there's work underway to change the Employment Equity Act. That's a big task. But if you have a policy that's built from that within your department that you can challenge and then change, and that's going to evoke positive change, those are the kind of pieces that I'd love to bring forward. In terms of advice I'd have for a new public servant, we've talked about them here today in terms of finding a mentor, networking, and again, highlighting a piece that Heather mentioned, and Darren also mentioned this as well, is I'd say first and foremost for me is having a personal philosophy. And that personal philosophy has always been about my own happiness. And I say that selfishly because if I'm not happy, I can't make other people happy. So that means I have to take care of myself. In my space, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a sister. We run a basketball academy here in BC. There's lots of different things I'm involved in, but within that, I have to take care of me. And that means finding my own timeline. I saw some questions in the chat that spoke about, the need to be bilingual. And again, Darren referenced this. It's very important to have that skill set, but at the same time, do it when it's comfortable for you. So for me, I've actually turned down opportunities, promotional opportunities when I was off on maternity leave with my third child. I wanted to be at home. And so I reconciled for me that would have certain impacts on my career. Choosing to do French language training, again, wasn't in a space earlier in my career where I could take that commitment on, recognizing its importance, but I wanted to do it at a time that I could have success with it. So when we say take care of you, it's encompassing all of those pieces so that back to the confidence that we started with, be confident in the decisions you're making to guide your career. And I know for me, it's work that those opportunities, they will present themselves. Again, just have to be patient. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. I'll now ask Liz if she can maybe go through the questions and maybe pick out one or two more questions to ask the panel. Liz, if you would.
Thank you very much. So let me ask you this brief question. If you were able to talk to your younger self, what would you say to your younger self in just one sentence?
I'm going to be funny here. I'm going to tell myself to buy Apple computer stock. Yeah. But no, I think education, and understanding that learning is not simply the formal stuff that happens in school, but you have the opportunity to learn every day, right? You just have to be aware that you're learning, right? And, I think when you're younger, I think, I'm trying to think back that far, but there's a point in life where you think you know it all, or that, you've already got things figured out, and you don't really know that you don't know yet. You have to understand that there's more that you don't know than what you do know. And the learning is a process that continues into, the last years of your career. So that's what I would tell my younger self, is that, learning is really key and it's continuous.
Thank you. In addition to buying some Apple stocks.
Apple stocks would be absolutely, yeah. There's a couple of more too I would consider, yeah.
Thank you very much. Who would like to be next? Yes,
I'll
Sena?
jump in, yeah. Je m'encouragerais à créer, maintenir de la résilience dès le début. So that self-care piece we've been talking about, that came up a little later for me, that I would need that. I would start under the understanding that this is going to be, there are going to be some unique challenges. I will need that extra self-care. Et je choisirais avec plus de précaution les voix que j'écoute. Pick those voices carefully from inside you, from outside you, that you are going to choose to listen to. I no longer prioritize those that are not willing to lean into the challenges, to step into the discomfort of difficult conversations and do the work it takes to change.
Thank you very much, Sena. Heather?
I was just going to add that, you know, when I look back at the beginning of my public service career, I did a lot of really smart things by accident because I had no idea what I was doing. I really did, you know, having been born and raised in Canada, having sort of strong and confident parents, I really came into the public service with a 100% and completely naive expectation that I would be treated fairly and equally as everyone else. So I applied for whatever I wanted to apply for. I did all kinds of things that there were unwritten rules that you weren't supposed to do. I had no limits on myself. And so I realized as I look back, you know, they say God looks after fools and children, that I did sort of accidentally do some things that I would encourage people to do on purpose. I didn't know that if you start as a clerk, at the time the wisdom was if you started as a clerk, then you'll never be anything except a clerk. I didn't know that. So I saw a job and it looked like I could do it. Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I apply for that? I saw a management position and I had zero expectation of getting it. My plan was when I don't get it, I will ask for feedback and then I'll know what I need to work on. To my amazement, I actually got that job. So I did a lot of good things by accident, and that was simply based on just not setting any limits on myself. I didn't know that there were supposed to be limits or that there might be any. I've been a little disillusioned 30 years later, but I'm really glad that I came in as innocently as I did, because I was not in my own way. And I really did sort of come in expecting to be treated fairly. Now that I look back, I recognize a number of startled faces that I missed at the time. People didn't quite know what to do with me, but it served me well. So just go boldly. In my case, it was from not knowing any better, but go boldly and get out of your own way.
Thank you so much, Heather, for saying that. And I think it is very important to hear that for all Black federal public servants, but particularly Black women who are bold, tenacious, courageous, and sometimes who are at the same time put down because of their boldness and their abilities to stand up and hold their ground.
Yeah.
So, last but not least, Roxanne Lee.
Thanks. I would say just 3 words: trust your gut. And that's advice I actually got from my very first director. Unbeknownst to me, it was probably the best piece of advice I ever got, because those times when I didn't, and whether you call it your spidey sense or whatever it is, I won't say I've regretted it, but it's caused me to rethink, why didn't I trust my gut? And it's everything from being in a situation where you're facing a microaggression, and what is your gut saying to you? There are times when you got to pick your battles, and sometimes it's saying, this is what I'm going to pick. And other times it's like, you know what? I need to step away from this one and deal with it in a different way. It also includes opportunities that come your way. Not every promotion is a good one necessarily. I've always looked very carefully at who the leaders are that I've worked for, and again, turned down opportunities when they were presented by leaders I didn't necessarily feel were the best fit for me. And interestingly enough, in one case, when I did that, this person then turned around and said to me, well, you're the last person in the pool, so you're never going to get hired anyways. And I thought to myself, well, thank God I said no to you, because that's not a place where I want to be. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, I was asked by another director to take on that position. And that person ended up being one of the closest and dearest mentors that I've had in terms of the advice she was able to give me on my career. So again, that trusting your gut piece, it's there for a reason. Use it.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roxanne. And we've come to the end of our broadcast today. We have just a few minutes left. And so I would like to thank the panelists on behalf of the Federal Young People Network, as well as the Visible Minority Employment Equity and Diversity Committee of the Western Region. And now we'll ask Joshua Frame to deliver the closing remarks. Joshua?
Excellent. Thanks very much. And this was an incredible session. So I think we all heard really inspiring words from each of you. So an individual thank you to Senna, to Roxanne, to Heather, to Darren, and to great moderation from Joyce and Liz. We're very pleased to, as the Federal Youth Network, to partner with the Federal Black Employees Caucus on this series of events. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. This is one piece of the puzzle. Talking about these issues more is one piece of the puzzle. And then the next piece is action. What's being done to accelerate career development for Black employees, for Indigenous employees, and to ensure that the public service as a whole is representative of who is in the public service right now. So I think we see at our events, people coming into the public service are looking up and saying, where is the representation in terms of senior leaders who are visible minorities, senior leaders who are part of and have a similar heritage and background to myself. I'll tell you a sort of brief story. So my first experience in an ADM level committee was back in 2016. So I walked into the room, I sat down, I saw as everyone kind of joined this meeting, and it was about 40 ADMs around the table. And of those 40 ADMs, 40 assistant deputy ministers, so senior level executives in the public service, 39 were male, one was female, and there was no person of color at that table. And I was personally shocked. I spent most of my career in the Ontario region, out of Toronto, a very diverse public service. Certainly still challenges in terms of having visible minorities in senior leadership positions, but not to the extent of having a table of all Caucasian people making decisions for the public service as a whole. Alors, je pense que le caucus des employés fédéraux noirs a un rôle très important à jouer comme représentant de cette communauté. So I think the Federal Black Employees Caucus has a very important role to play as an advocate for Black employees in the government of Canada. But I think we, and meaning allies, have a very important role to play as well. This is not a fight that that FBEC should be fighting on its own. And I think we are wanting to be partners in this fight, and I'm hoping that we're not talking about it as a fight in 3 years or 5 years. We're saying this is a collaborative effort where we've changed the public service, so that 3 years from now, we're having a discussion about progress being made and further progress. So a huge thanks to each of you for sharing your stories and sharing your experiences. I joke that, Heather, we need to start a punch card for frequent speakers, since I think we've engaged you as a speaker every month since November. So a huge thanks to you, but a huge thanks to all of you for sharing your stories, sharing your experiences. And let's continue this conversation. And our next event will be on the 23rd of February. So talking about anti-Black racism and the impacts on mental health. J'espère que vous allez nous joindre le 23 février pour le prochain événement sur la santé mentale. Et puis, merci à tous. So have a great day, everyone. And to confirm, we will have the recording up of these two sessions later this week, so that you can share with any of your colleagues who missed this opportunity. But thank you very much, everyone. Merci à tous et bonne journée. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Josh. Now, as we close off the session, just remember a few ideas that came up. Find your voice, take risk, find a mentor, challenge yourself, and ignore the noise. So with that, I don't know if Liz would like to say a few words before we go. We have about a minute left. So Liz, if you would like to say a bit of closing.
Merci encore à tout le monde d'avoir dit oui à l'invitation et merci au public, FYN and FBC. Merci.
Thank you. And I do apologize that we couldn't get to all the questions today. We would need about 3 hours to answer all the questions posted here. And we had some wonderful questions. So even if your questions were not answered today, don't think we weren't aware of them. We were fully aware of them. We just need 3 hours to do this broadcast today. So with that, I would like to say thank you to everyone and do have a good day.